Okay, our first project will be the lower mandible. As you can see here, we have the lower mandible, posterior teeth prepared down to a flat surface. So we will use this model to learn to wax the occlusal scheme for the lower posterior teeth. Now, what we need to do is to find out where and how do we develop the occlusal surfaces and anatomy of the posterior teeth. As you can see, we have the outer boundaries of the teeth here. Since it's so nicely and flatly cut, we can basically tell from the height of contour of the adjacent teeth where the boundaries of our teeth are. So in this way we can approximate where we're going to put our cusps and where we're going to put our fossas. The easiest way to start planning this is through the placement of reference lines. We have reference lines on the buccal reference line, and we have the lingual reference line on the lingual. And then we'll have the fossa reference line in the center. Now, to figure out where to put these lines is first we have to locate the cusp tips on this third molar here. And then we locate the central fossa, which is right here. And then you have the cusp tip on the canine tooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw the buccal reference line according to the buccal cusps. Now this line will flow on a slight curve since this is an arch form. We have a slight arch here and then a sharper arch in the front. So the reference line starts from the buccal cusp tips of the third molar, and we just continue through towards the cusp tip of the canine. Then we'll do the lingual reference line according to the lingual cusp tips. And the fossa reference line according to the fossa. And the center of each tooth as we get to the canine. Now we're going to do the other side the same way. We have marked our cusp tips and the central fossa, and now we go ahead and mark the reference lines on the buccal. And the reference lines on the lingual. Now we do the fossa reference line in the center. Alright, so our next task is to figure out where we're going to put the cusp tips. So there's one way to do it is first we're gonna take a look at some teeth, and we can this way approximate about where the cusp tips are on the first and second molars, and on the premolars. We can also take a look at our unprepared model, which is, this is exactly the same arch as our prepared arch. It was made from the same model. So this will give you like a more accurate representation of where we're going to put the cusps. So if we draw a point on each of these cusp tips here, we can kind of approximate where these are going to go. So if we place it adjacent to the other arch, we can kind of tell. There's a book here that we can kind of take a look at these places, how they place the cusp tips. As we can tell here, we have the cusp tips on the premolars located a little bit to the mesial. On the first molar, we have the mesial cusp tip just slightly off to the buccal of the buccal reference line, and the distal buccal cusp tip will go a little bit more towards the buccal on the buccal reference line. On the second molar, we have it just slightly off the line, just like that. So if we look at these, we know that these go a little bit offset. So if we go to the buccal cusp tip, we're going to put it slightly off to the buccal on the line. The distal buccal cusp tip will go a little bit further buccal. And then for the second molar, we're going to have just about even, just off to the buccal on the line, just like this. And on the premolars, as we saw, mesial and mesial just off to the buccal of the reference line. So we're going to do the same thing on the opposing side, on the contralateral side. So we have just to the buccal, we have just to the buccal on the mesial cusp, and a little bit more buccal on the distal buccal cusp. So we have it like that. On the premolars, we have a mesial and mesial, just like that. On the lingual portions, they go just about even because there's two cusps on each. So we're going to draw the cusps dividing the tooth evenly. On the premolars, since these are lower premolars, on the second premolar, the mesial cusp is larger and the distal is smaller, and on the first premolar, the distal is the smaller cusp. The distal is the larger cusp, and the mesial, sometimes it doesn't exist. Now on the original cast, we only have just like one cusp on the lingual here, but we're gonna divide it so there's two cusps. Some teeth are different on different people. So some people have one cusp, some people have two. These lower premolars are kind of like iffy, Yeah, some people could have different shapes of lower premolars than others. Some could have 2 cusps on the lingual, some could have 1. But generally there are 2 on the second and 1 on the first. The first is the lingual, is the larger, and on the second one the mesial is the larger. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to mark the linguals just about evenly on the line. And remember, these lines are basically just to get us started. At a later point we can move these a little bit depending on how our upper fossas line up. Remember that we're going to have to do one side cusp to marginal ridge and the other side cusp to fossa. It's also important to note that in our little book on our tooth-to-tooth occlusion book, this one, the tooth to marginal ridge occlusion is called tooth-to-tooth teeth occlusion, and the cusp to fossa occlusion is called tooth-to-tooth occlusion. So it's tooth-to-tooth, tooth-to-tooth teeth. Generally, descriptively, it does make sense because on a cusp to marginal ridge occlusion or cusp to embrasure occlusion, one tooth could touch 2 teeth because they kind of go in between the teeth. So if there's a contact in between here, if it's a tooth to embrasure, then technically that cusp is touching these 2 teeth. So hence tooth to tooth teeth. But it's kind of clumsy to say it that way. So in class we'll just call it cusp to fossa and cusp to marginal ridge, or cusp to embrasure, depending on what we're doing.